Okay, awesome. So I just want to start off by saying that before I continue with this presentation is that sexual assault will only end when perpetrators no longer commit sexual assault. And perpetrators are disproportionately male. So to get there, we have to develop versions of masculinity that are not linked to sexual conquest and entitlement. But to confront a critical systemic issue of this nature, we have to address it in all areas. So I want to discuss the attrition of sexual assault cases. And I want to preface by saying that every victim survivor has a different conception of justice, but I will describe today like the demographic that chooses to pursue justice through the criminal justice system and my attempt to understand why and how it fails them. So I'm going to share my screen now and everyone can just let me know if they are able to see it. Okay, can I get like a thumbs up? Can you guys see that? All right, cool. Hopefully it's taking up the whole screen for you guys because it's not for me, but that's fine. Okay, so what is attrition? So I want to just say that attrition is probably a word that you've heard about before, and it applies no differently when it's talking to sexual assault. It just means that it's just the lowering or like the trickling down of cases. So here on the slide, like it says, it's like grinding down by friction is like the dictionary term, but it refers to sexual assault cases and the numbers of cases that drop out at each stage of the criminal justice system. And a major factor that plays into attrition is the victim's lack of confidence in the system. So during doing this research, I wanted to better understand when and how and why our cases dropped from or otherwise lost to the criminal justice system. So the goal of the research was to reduce attrition. Okay. Does everyone see the next slide? Just want to make sure everyone's awesome. Okay. So here's like a small graphic that's just going to help you conceptualize what attrition is. So this is a 2019 national data from the US, and it basically describes that for every 100 rapes that are attempted or reported to the police, attempted to be reported by the police by women, only 19 cases lead to arrests. And of those 19 cases, only 5 end in a guilty verdict. And from those 5 cases, only 1 case ends in a guilty verdict through trial. The other ones through plea deals. So this kind of just shows you how like cases don't really reach that level all the way through to prosecution, that they may have that goal set in the beginning, and that can change along the course. And I wanted to really understand like why is it if like out of these 100 that are reported, and that's of course those who are reported, how do we get to those 1? So this is like a little graphic that I created to help you like conceptualize it as well. So how like attrition plays into this cycle. So obviously with the attrition of cases, it starts to develop these rape myths and beliefs in a just world that, okay, well, you know, these are the cases that are being prosecuted. So clearly like it doesn't happen as often as we think it does. And that creates like that real rape stereotype that we're going to talk about later, like of like rape happening by like strangers, of someone who's like jumping out of a bush or something. And it's someone you may not know, and that creates that stereotype and that stigma. So I conducted a literature review on the attrition of child sexual assault cases, and I wanted to share with you all some of my findings from that. Although I will be talking about children cases, the information applies to adults as well. So in the research, I saw there was a delayed reporting norm that happens with sexual assault cases. So delays can occur from 30 years or more. They're not uncommon, and specifically with like this demographic of minors. And what happens with this when it comes into the criminal justice system is that prosecution attempts to discredit the witness by like attacking this delay, like of not reporting when the event occurred. And by doing this, they're suggesting that the delay itself is implying that the event did not occur. This is especially likely with incest victim survivors. And as I will discuss later, you know, with reporting, it's very difficult for victim survivors to report exactly when it happens, just because of how trauma functions and our brain functions with instances, it's hard to realize in the moment what has happened to you, fully comprehend that, and really understand what avenues you want to take to address it, or whether you want to address it at all. So through this research of understanding how justice is denied because there's this perceived lack of credibility with this delayed reporting, it suggested to me a few things. And one of them being that the importance of raising awareness of sexual violence, which is what we're doing today, and developing initiatives to increase youth confidence in the system and encourage earlier reporting, as that seems to be one of the main things that would lead to lowering attrition. So I'm going to talk also about the statute of limitations and how it relates to sexual assault and to reporting. So statute of limitations, for those of you who don't understand, it's like this legal term. And basically what it means is that it's a time frame in which from when the victim survivor when the event occurs to when they want to pursue legal action, whether that be like a lawsuit or a legal claim. And so this window, basically, your ability to prosecute and your ability to make that legal claim, it's different in every state, in each jurisdiction, in each country. And what happens is that because it's a window for when you're reporting your sexual assault, my research just concluded that it serves only to protect the very people who perpetrated the abuse. And having extensions from 1, 5, or even 10 years, I found it was found to be arbitrary, and that in order to improve a just outcome, statutes of limitations should be completely eliminated. The victim survivor should have the ability to report their abuse at any given point, and they shouldn't have like a time limit or a time frame in which they should do that. And like I mentioned earlier, one of the most challenging things is that over 90% of child sexual assault perpetrators are someone that those children knew and trusted. So there's a lot of consequences in unresolved trauma and sexual abuse that prevents children from coming forward immediately after being assaulted. So a lot of kids do not report sexual assault or sexual abuse that occurred when they're children until their adult years is usually what happens, the typical situation. And I wanted to talk briefly also about the case in Florida. And actually, there was a great step forward that occurred this past summer in July 1st, 2020. Donna's Law got passed, which is a new law in Florida that eliminates the statute of limitations, which is amazing. This is something that my research concluded would be the best step forward. Unfortunately, though, when this got passed, which is July 1st, it meant that it would be effective for child sexual cases moving past July 1st. So if the event if the sexual assault occurred before that date, it wouldn't be applied to this unlimited time frame. But it is a step forward moving on to other sexual assault cases. So I wanted to also tell you what my research was able to conclude. So here in the US, there's actually very little research on child sexual assault and attrition, which is, I found really like alarming, given that this is such a pertinent issue, and especially with our criminal justice system. And the findings that I were able to find that would lower the rate of attrition, meaning that the cases would follow through to their idealized point, was having a trustee accompanying the victim survivor and questioning by the police. And this significantly lowered the rate of attrition. And I found that this is best if there was like a relationship with this trustee, meaning that they were able to trust them and depend on them, because children are more likely to share with people that they can trust and they feel safe with. And having a person not having a trustee with them and having having that constant questioning and dealing with prosecution as well, it can feel like a second defilement, like betraying the victim survivor's trust in a way. So having this trustee is very important, as like police do act as gatekeepers in a sense to whether or not the victim survivor is going to get the outcome that they really want. So a trustee helps with the confidence of victim survivors with testimonies, because like I mentioned before, prosecution tries to discredit them. And the Rape Crisis Center, who's presenting today, will talk a little bit more on that and their role with this. Another finding I did have was that labels I'm going to explain what labels are too, are typically like euphemisms that children use to describe the events of child sexual assault. So for example, like in the UK, they might say like willy rather than like penis. And then here we might say like belly rather than abdomen. It's just they're not always euphemisms. It's just how children describe it using the vocabulary and the words that make sense to them and from their understanding. And I found that when eliciting or presenting child evidence, professionals should consider allowing children to create labels wherever possible and like to use those labels consistently throughout the entire criminal justice process in order to maximize the children's capacity to describe the event. It builds confidence for the victim survivor to be able to tell their story in the way that makes the most sense to them. And using other labels that are unfamiliar with them can be damaging to their ability to accurately recount them. Police or prosecution or attorneys, they might ask the child to describe the event using the words that they understand. They're like, okay, so when you say belly, you mean abdomen, and the child probably will get confused or not be able to recount it. And it changes their story. So allowing them to tell their story in the way that makes sense to them, it's very important so that they can be able to describe it fully and accurately. And this is especially important to exercise this approach with cases of repeated sexual abuse as well, given the psychology and the science behind it. So all of this brought me to, oh wow, I don't know if that was able to change. Okay. I don't know if you guys were seeing the slides I was seeing. Okay, so moving forward, this brought me to questions that I brought to my research. So these questions that my research, I was able to bring to my research brought me to the next stage in analyzing the data we were collecting from Alachua County. All the information I gathered was national and global data, but I obviously try to keep it within the United States to understand the context. But now we're moving into analyzing data from Alachua County and trying to understand how these questions would apply then there. And we're conducting interviews now and hope to publish within the next 1 to 2 years. So I'm very grateful for that and this opportunity and everything that I've learned. And that's my Works Cited page. And I just wanted to before I move on to questions, I wanted to hand off I'm going to be handing off the presentation to the Rape Crisis Center. I just now covered attrition, but they will be covering the roles in the process, disclosure resources, and Title IX, and much more. So for the time being on this portion of attrition, does anyone have any questions? Let me stop share. All right, cool. You can also use the chat if you would like. I know that I realized that my slides were not changing. Sorry, I didn't notice that one, but yeah. So it doesn't seem like anyone has any questions, but you can always interject throughout the course of this presentation. And now I'm going to hand it over to Cassandra and Valeria.
Right. Hi, friends. So one moment as we do the normal sharing screen process. I think if we do it this way, still learning. And I think we have it on the first one. Yes. All right. So as I mentioned, my name is Cassandra. I am going to tag my coworker Valeria in it for 2 different sections. But Valeria, while I get started, if you could enter our helpline number in the chat box, that would be helpful. So as I mentioned, we had the opportunity to meet Alexandra through the work of our advisory board council, who has really collaborated with our center and the Gainesville Police Department in looking at our sexual assault cases over the past years, which I think has been really instrumental in helping us understand, one, how our center responds to cases, but also as a community in a whole, in what that criminal justice system process looks like. So we're extremely grateful to have people who understand the data and know what to look for and can break apart all of that information. And so thank you for sharing your work that you've done already, Alexandra. And so with that, this is just a reminder to take care of yourself. Unfortunately, we've all been impacted by sexual violence in some way or another, whether it's ourselves personally, we've had a friend share or disclose a family member, or if you're just bombarded by information in the media. So we do want to make sure that you take care of yourself. So take a break, come back if you need to. Feel free to practice any breathing or grounding techniques that you need to help kind of regulate your body. Valeria entered our 24/7 helpline number. So again, that's 24/7, and someone can call and you'll be greeted by one of our staff members that can do some counseling with you. And then just be kind and gentle with yourself. I think if anything we've learned, over the past year or two with COVID and this pandemic, we're all kind of battling something. And so just be kind and give yourself some grace. So these are some of the topics that we're going to be covering today. Bodily autonomy, and that includes some information about consent, some of our reporting options, and how we can support a friend if we have the privilege of having someone share that, disclose the story to us, and how we can change the culture through harm reduction. And then lastly, we'll share some information about the services that we provide. So intro, my name is Cassandra. And then bodily autonomy. And so, I gotta move this box so I can see everyone's beautiful faces. There we go. And so, as you can see in the picture, we have a great picture kind of explaining like my body, my roles. And surprisingly, the more presentations I've done in the community, I've learned that people are surprised to understand that they are actually in control of themselves and their body. And so it is a conversation that we are, trying to be more involved in, because as you can see, body autonomy is the right for a person to govern what happens to their body without external influence or coercion. And we definitely advocate and push to have that conversation as soon as you can with your children, because I've learned that once we get into college and adulthood, it's really fascinating to learn that people don't necessarily have those conversations about what rights we have with our own body. And so definitely stressing that you are the only one that governs your body, and that your body, your rules, what you want to happen to it is only through you. And so Alex and I, we actually talked about this picture earlier, and through that, it comes with consent. I think it's very important to understand consent when it comes to our body, and understanding the conversations that we're going to have and what happens to our body and who are we giving access to and what they have the ability to do with our bodies. And so great graphic. If you love French fries, it's something you can easily remember. So consent is something that is freely given. It's reversible, it's informed, it's enthusiastic, and it's specific. And we're going to break those down a little bit more in the next slide. So again, consent means agreeing to an action based on your knowledge of what that action involves, its likely consequences, and have the option of saying no. And I think that's really important to remember, is that anything that we are giving permission to, we have that ability to revoke at any point in time. And so this kind of breaks down your FRIES acronym a little bit more in depth. So as you remember, consent is freely given. It is something that should be done without pressure, without coercion, manipulation, or under the influence of drugs or alcohol. We typically are thinking of sexual assault, and in this case, we know substance abuse is the #1 used substance for drug-facilitated assaults. And so people don't necessarily remember, like if you are under the influence of alcohol or any other substance, you can't consent. So we definitely want to make sure we stress that. Again, it's reversible. So you are free to change your mind about what you're doing at any time. It's informed. So each person involved understands what each sexual act entails. And we're going to go into the next slide. It's going to, have some ways that you can kind of ask about what our partner and what we're agreeing and doing, which I think is really helpful. But we definitely want to make sure that we're always communicating, because that when we have a breakdown in communication, we lose the ability to kind of really understand our body autonomy. Enthusiastic, yes. We definitely, again, want to make sure everyone's informed, we understand what we're doing, and that it's something that we don't feel coerced or pressured into. And then again, it's specific. So saying yes to one thing does not mean you said yes to any other things. So we want to be really specific in what we're doing. And again, it doesn't have to be related to sex. If you have a partner and we want to have a conversation, are we doing public display of affection? Are we going to hold hands in public? Are we going to kiss in public? Are we sharing our relationship status on social media? I have some friends who are very firm. They don't use social media. And so when we take pictures, they're always reminding me like, hey, don't post that. And I respect that decision, because, that's their right. So we, again, want to make sure we're very specific in what we are wanting to do and what our boundaries are. And so as you can see, here are some examples of why consent is important. But I would like to open this up to the conversation. So definitely feel free for anyone to chime in on any other examples. Why do you think consent is important? And why do you think we need to have conversations about it? If you feel comfortable, I would love to hear from you. Of course, you can chat in our box, and Valeria, I'm going to throw you in there. If there's a chat, please feel to read that out.
I think something I guess I wanted to bring up also is like the way I think something we talk a lot about in our generation is the way we dress and how like that involves consent and obviously that I had mentioned earlier like that sense of entitlement. So it's like I feel like a lot of times perpetrators just like they see that as an invitation because of you're exposing yourself. It's like, oh well, you're dressing this way, so you wanted that attention. Like I'm giving you that attention, and it's just obviously that's coming down to educating and sharing with people that obviously the way we dress is not invitation for anything. It's simply the way in which we express ourselves. And I think that's definitely a misconception. Also generational, probably understanding that's been growing and evolving just because our sense of like fashion and the way we express ourselves is definitely changing more than traditional standards.
And then you bring an interesting point too about dressing and generational. So I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Malawi, Africa, and one of the things that I learned upon first, the Peace Corps kind of gives you some information about their culture, and so one of the things that they stress upon is that women are not allowed to wear skirts or shorts. Anything should be below the knee. And so of course I stack up on like long pants, long skirts, because you want to be respectful of the culture that I'm about to go into. And so during my service, we learned that if you wore anything above your knee, you were considered a hule, which in Malawi meant you were a prostitute, sex worker. And we're like, that doesn't even make sense. Like, how are we judging that? But again, I think our culture can really make an impact on what our belief systems are. And so in Malawi, that was a thing. And so when I came back here, when you live in another country for almost 2.5 years, and I'm like, everyone's in super trouble. I was like, oh my gosh, like I need you guys to cover up. Like, what are we doing? And then I had to have a conversation with my, internal stuff and like, we're not in Malawi, but also people have the right, and the ability to dress how they want. And, you should be comfortable in expressing your identity without feeling that you're going to be judged for that, and be labeled and make that some sort of invitation for something. And so here are some examples of ways to ask for consent. And I know in conversations, you're like, it's so stupid. I'm not going to ask my partner if I can kiss them or if I can hold their hand, and, thinking it's going to break the intimacy of it. But in fact, it really doesn't. It really engages the conversation. It can really strengthen the relationship that you have with your partner, or even, again, your friends, your significant others, because we're showing them that we trust them, but we are giving them a lot of trust and communication and safety with our own selves, because we respect what they say and we want to make sure that we're following those. So some examples, as you can see, we want to ask, hey, are you okay with this? So again, as I mentioned, I have friends who are not social media users. So something as simple as taking pictures. If I do anything, I want to ask, hey, are you okay if I share this? Are you okay if I post this? Do you want to have sex? Sometimes people just make an assumption because you maybe are using a dating app or something, and you meeting for coffee, or you're having a beer, you're having a drink, whatever it could be. There's some general consumption that because of X, Y, and Z, it's an open invitation, and it's not. So we really want to set our ground and our meaning and our intent up front. Another example, do you want me to keep going? So this could be geared toward a sexual activity. If you're engaging in a sexual activity with your partner, we're hoping that it's something that's pleasurable, and you want to make sure things are going in the right direction and not being in an uncomfortable. And then of course you can ask, how does that feel? I have a friend who it was a couple years ago, he was going through a massage school. And so let me tell you, if you have the ability to live next to a neighbor who's going through massage school and they need like hours, for their classes and programs, it's like, I will, please sign me up. I will be your test, buddy. And so he would, come over and he would give me massages, and then he's studying and he's like, okay, this muscle is it's clearly platonic and it was very educational. But I was like, I'm getting a free massage out of this. I don't care. But he was very firm, like very conscious about checking in with me every part of the way, making sure what he was doing. One, he was telling me like educational wise, like, I'm massaging this muscle because it's connected to this. I'm like, I don't really care. But thank you for, feeling comfortable and trusting me and sharing that information, because he wanted to make sure what I was receiving was comfortable and that he knew that I knew what he was doing. And then, as you can see, asking for consent, it doesn't have to be awkward, right? It can be something that can be fun. It can strengthen your relationship, and you can make yourselves laugh and have fun with everything. I'm going to go back here. So kind of going back to body autonomy, I would love to kind of open again the conversation, if you feel comfortable. Have there been a time in your life or experiences where you may not have felt that you had control of your body and you didn't feel that you had body autonomy? And sort of opening up, what does that look like to you, and what did that feel like when you didn't have that control?
I can open it up just to get the ball rolling, I guess. But I think the first thing that comes to my mind for me, bodily autonomy, would be in my culture, as I mentioned before, a way to greet people, including strangers, for the first time would be a kiss on the cheek or like a side shake and stuff like that. And that's something that I was raised into doing every family function, every family gathering, friend gathering, things like that. It wasn't until I started growing older where I'm just like, you know what, I'm very comfortable with doing this with family friends and with family as well. But when it comes to strangers, like I don't want to put my face next to their face. I don't even know them. So just getting that autonomy and deciding for myself that when it comes to strangers, just a wave or a handshake, regardless of gender, is something that I felt more comfortable with doing. But it wasn't until I had that internal conversation, I'm like, why am I feeling uncomfortable doing this? Is when I realized, oh, I haven't given myself that bodily autonomy to decide whether or not I want to create a person in that sort of way.
Mm-hmm. It's kind of funny when you mention kissing, like greeting people. So I'm a hugger. I love hugging people. And I feel like you're either a hugger or you're not a hugger. And I see them like, "Ooh, hi, hug." And I just kind of go in for the hug and just go in for the dive. And so I really have had to, again, check in with myself and be like, okay, I'm reading someone's body language and they are clearly like, backing away from me, or like, hey, I'm really not a hugger. And so again, it's really important to check in with people before you go into the dive and start hugging people. But also reading body language, it's really important because that will tell a lot of what people are comfortable with, and being mindful, because even though I can tell their arms are coming up, or their facial reaction, like that doesn't give me the reason or the right to kind of like keep going into that. And so again, it does take a lot of work on yourself, because you want to be mindful of how you interpret that. And this is a great way then where you can come into some of these examples and check in and be like, hey, are you okay? Are you comfortable with me doing this? And I would say, I think the pandemic has, in a way, kind of helped with that body autonomy, as far as people staying 6 feet away. I remember I was in the grocery store, so Aldi, it's one of my favorite stores, and you're and you have your shopping cart. I'm getting ready to check out. I'm kind of just oblivious at the moment, waiting, and I'd pushed my cart a little bit further than the 6 feet. Like, they have your lanes are kind of marked with stickers now. And the cashier was like, "Get back." And I was like, "Ooh, what's happening? What are we doing?" And he's like, "You're not 6 feet away." And I'm like, "Oh, I'm so sorry." And then I stepped back and I stood on my proper circle. And so, immediately I thought, hey, we have already adopted to the 6 feet away thing, in such a short time frame. So I truly believe we all have the ability to understand what consent, and we understand what body autonomy is, and we understand, like, hey, we need to respect the space of other people. So we're going to go into our next section on how to support our family and friends. So unfortunately, bad things happen in our community, in our lives, in our country. And so sexual assault is one of those things, and it really is a disempowering experience. And so a part of that is that the trust in others has been betrayed. Your trust in, maybe it's your significant other, maybe it's a family member, maybe it's the criminal justice system. That trust has been shattered, and the sense of control that you had has been taken away, and that's been violated. We know sexual assault, it's not about sex, it's about power and control, and taking that person's bodily autonomy away from them. Your sense of safety has been violated. People experience shock, and most often what really is difficult is that the survivor and offender know one another. And I know Alexandra mentioned that in her presentation earlier, and which can make reporting, if that's something that someone wants to even explore, significantly more difficult to do when you have that relationship that's an acquaintance. And so if you're deciding to disclose sexual assault or that private information to a family or a friend, or even, a 24-hour helpline, it's really difficult because you have to be vulnerable. You are taking that risk and letting other people in. And unfortunately, you don't have control in how others are going to react to that. Some could react more positively, some may react negatively. And people just don't know what to say. Some people don't know what to do. And best intentions can unfortunately really hinder someone's sharing of a trauma. And we also want to consider our cultural considerations. As I mentioned, my experience in Malawi, just how their perspective on women who wore anything above the knee. So if I were to have worn something above a knee and I was sexually assaulted, what would that look like for me? How is that going to play in how I get respected and treated and believed? which I think ties into that next point, and the fear of being stigmatized and not believed, I think is really important. And these are all things that come into play when we decide to share. And again, it doesn't even have to be about a sexual assault. Maybe it's someone who's within the LGBTQ plus community, and they're deciding to share their identity with someone and be authentic and share who they believe that they are. And that can be, again, a really disempowering experience and scary process. And so it's kind of cheesy, but one way on how you can sort of help validate and support someone is to think about stalking someone, or as you can see, stalk. And one of those things that you can do is genuinely just start by believing them. There's an incredible campaign through the End Violence Against Women's International called Start by Believing. And our role, we're not law enforcement, we're not judges, we're not prosecutors. You know, our role is when someone to disclose is to just believe them. Law enforcement, the criminal justice system, if that's something that someone is going to explore, they're going to have to go through an investigation process. But our role right now is to just believe someone. It would be no different if someone came to you and said, hey, my car was stolen. We would want to believe them. And, you know, Alexandra mentioned too, you know, sexual assault is the most underreported crime. And part of those reason is because of those subjects that we just talked about earlier. It's a very disempowering experience. And so Start by Believing can really set the tone and that kind of precedence for what the support that someone's going to get through this trauma. It's really important to thank them for trusting you. It truly is a privilege that someone has chosen you to disclose to. And we really want to be mindful of that and acknowledge that trust that we've been given. So of course, this would be something that you're not going to share without that person's permission. Unfortunately, unless you're a child, unless there's some minor, it's a vulnerable population, the categories that we would become a mandated reporter would have to come into play. Outside of those, you know, we would want to be respectful of that person's privacy and confidentiality. It's important to ask how you can help. I know for me, sometimes I can go straight into like a fixing mode because it's something I have control over. But I really have learned to ask someone, you know, when they share something with me, okay, would you like me to just listen and just be here as a support person right now? Or do you need help coming up with a plan, coming up with some actions and resources? So asking how you can help before we start diving into things and assuming that they are going to want to do what you might want to do or what you are suggesting. It's also important to listen without judgment. So again, we want to validate their experience. We want to validate what they're sharing with us, and no judgment. We're not here to judge or question anything that may have happened regarding the scenario of what they're sharing. And we want to keep supporting them. So when we ask them how they help, if they're like, hey, I need help with resource, we can look up the resources. We can provide that information for them. Maybe it's something as simple as like, hey, I need groceries. Maybe it's something about, hey, can you get my homework for me for my class? Can you take my dog out? Because I'm not comfortable being outside yet. You want to support them in ways that they're going to need the support. So again, stalk is such a simple phrase, but it can really expand the care and the support that your person who's ever sharing to you is going to get. Are there any tips? Do you feel like there are things, definitely kind of open again the conversation here if anyone's interested, but other things or practices that someone can feel like would be helpful if someone disclosed an assault to them, things that you feel like you might want to do that's not listed here?
I just wanted to say, because it came to mind, like, because when you were talking about like, not like, you're not law enforcement, you're not part of that interrogation process. So try to keep yourself out of that interrogation process. I think like the automatic assumption is that we all like assume that reporter role, and it's like, where were you? What was happening? What was doing? Just let them tell their story. I think would be like the main important thing. The more important thing is just hearing them. And I think that that's a very important position, because when we like assume that active role of like asking those questions, you may be touching on boundaries, or it may be bringing back memories or re-traumatizing that person when they're trying to tell you their story in the way that's comfortable to them. So just let them speak. I think like you said, just like sit back and hear them.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's so important, Alexandra, is that that's not our role, is to investigate anything. Our role is not to interrogate them and to ask a million questions. Like, I promise you, they're already asking all of those questions themselves, internally, questioning, did I do this right? Could I have done something differently? Why did I do that? And so they don't need anyone else coming and asking those questions and making them doubt their experience. So yeah, absolutely. That's a very good point.
We have a question in the chat. I can read it aloud.
Yes, please.
She said, how would you recommend about supporting a friend who doesn't believe that they've been assaulted when it's clear that they have, and instead blames themselves for what happened?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Self-blame is, a critical component to most sexual assault survivors. And it's really, really difficult when we are confident, in identifying, hey, this was an assault, and we want to start giving them the options and the resources. But unfortunately, it's something that that person has to come to on their own decision. And so just respecting that space and that time. Sometimes it can be helpful, when you say, hey, I do think you've been sexually assaulted, and I think, this is what happened. It's going to take time for them to kind of process it and come to their own terms, and their own explanation. So this is where it's really hard to be that friend where we kind of just have to sit back and remind them that you're here and that you're not going to go anywhere, and that you're going to support them, in whatever process that they decide is going to be best for them. So I definitely implore you to continually to check in with your friend, and that person, but just to remind yourself that obviously outside being a mandated reporter, our role is to just simply sit back, support, and be there as a friend. I don't know, Valeria, as an advocate too, if there's something that you would like to add into that, feel free to do that.
No, just definitely agree with you. I know, like you've mentioned before, we just really want, I think when a friend kind of discloses something, it hurts us as well, just because we're friends with them and we care about this person. And then we go about creating this plan of action, and we get, I don't know, maybe upset or frustrated if that friend isn't going along with what we feel is the best kind of route for them. But I definitely agree with Cassie, just always maintaining that presence in their lives, and respecting obviously their boundaries if they don't want to talk about it, but just being that present figure of like support. And it can be hard to do, and also just making sure like not all the burden is placed on you, but just making sure that they know that you're there for them.
Great point, Valeria. Thank you. And I know our helpline, is in the chat box too. And I think a lot of people will say, "Oh, I wasn't raped. I didn't experience something." But as Valeria mentioned, an assault trauma, it also impacts us as friends. And so our helpline is available for anyone who's been impacted by violence. So it doesn't just have to be what we consider the primary individual. It can be family, it can be friends, it can be loved ones, because it is a hard toll to kind of take and carry and be a part of. And so just to know that our services are available for everyone. So thank you for that question. Let's see. Oops. There we go. And so I know Alexandra kind of too mentioned some of these things, but if you would take a moment and kind of look through this slide here, and what would you say there are some phrases in here that we think would be helpful, and there are some phrases in here that we think would be not as helpful. So if you are comfortable, definitely feel free to voice some of those things or in the chat box. Are there phrases in here that you would gravitate to, regardless if you think it would be right or wrong, or things that you've said to anyone who's disclosed something to you?
We have in the chat box that someone mentioned, I think affirming that you believe someone is very important. Yeah, that, like we mentioned, I think that is the first step, is just telling them like, I believe you, I hear you.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think for me, when I went through therapy, I think one of the things they've always said was like, it's not your fault. Like I've always heard like therapists say like, it's not your fault. And I think like that's something, for me, it resonates a lot. Because I think like we mentioned before, it's like that self-blaming. It's like,
Mhm.
it's odd, we automatically assume the position, especially as women. I feel we assume this position that it's like, what did I do? What did I do? What was my role in this? And we reflect a lot, which it's good to reflect, but it's very damaging to blame, reflecting and blaming are something that we need to be able to segregate the two.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's hard because I think Valeria and I, we touched upon this before we started our presentation, is that, we can kind of break this into things where it's like, hey, these would be things that are really helpful, and these are things that you should avoid saying. But as we mentioned earlier, we have good intentions, right? And we may not necessarily know the right thing to say. So, or think, we might say, hey, I told you not to go X, Y, and Z, or I told you not to wear this, do that, go with this person, trust this thing. We can internally process, we're trying to be good and we're trying to do the right thing and be supportive, but it can come off as being in an interrogative position, which can really kind of minimize the care and support that the person should be receiving. So definitely just kind of picking through this, some really important ones we would like to say is that, it's not your fault and that you're not alone. There are people, organizations, helpline centers, numbers, there's a ton of resources and people out there in the community that really are here to support you. But as a friend basis right there. And I'm sorry this happened. And I believe you. What can I do to support you? I'm here for you. Those are just some of the key phrases, that if someone were to disclose to you in any capacity, that we would really encourage you to kind of to lead off with. And some of the things like, are you sure you didn't lead them on? Why didn't you report or tell someone sooner? You will bring shame to the family if you tell, or I told you so. Those are all things that I promise you, your friend, person who's sharing with you, those are things that are already being thought about. And so our role again is to not add extra stress and extra guilt and shame and self-doubt on a person. Our role is to say the opposite of those things. Okay, reporting options. So I'm going to pass this on to Valeria now.
Alrighty, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so first thing I wanted to talk about is barriers. So I'm just going to go through this list, and feel free to add any that you kind of recognize that aren't on this list. But definitely when it comes to an individual trying to engage either with our services at our center or even with the legal system, there are these obstacles or these barriers that get in the way of connecting to those. And the first one being distrust in the criminal justice system. Now, this can stem from, generational history with the criminal justice system, and so more so like generational distrust. It could also stem from kind of false expectations from the media. We were earlier talking about, Criminal Minds. Those kind of shows that kind of complete a case from, I think, 45 minutes to an hour. So it does leave those false expectations. And also just from previous experiences with the criminal justice system, a lot of people will fall back on how certain cases in their past didn't go the way that they wanted to, and that kind of built that distrust. Moving forward to poverty. Poverty, just individuals who are facing poverty alongside with poverty, unfortunately face a lot of other issues that can prevent them from connecting to our services. Next one being unfamiliar with resources or lack of resources. From time to time, when I reach out to individuals who are victims of crime, victims of sexual assault, and so on, I hear that they didn't know about our center. This is their first time hearing about it. So that's really kind of motivating us to kind of move forward in outreach. But it is something that people don't know about, so they're not going to engage if they don't know about certain resources. And also, if an individual has never been with or never worked on a case in the legal process, going into it, it can just be really overwhelming. You hear a lot about legal jargon. There's a lot of steps within the process that you don't know about, and it can just be really overwhelming and really intimidating for somebody who's never really been in the thick of it. The next one being service providers are not linguistically and culturally competent. So with our center, before my position, I think we had some individuals who were bilingual. Now with mine, I think I could connect with certain communities and certain kind of enclaves that have been underserved. And working with those communities and enclaves, you notice that there is that disconnect, obviously with language, and then with cultural aspects coming from different countries where the legal system is not the same. It does create kind of fear and intimidation because they don't want to step forward not knowing what's next to come. So being able to kind of provide them those translations, those interpretations can really be helpful. And then the last one being the strong loyalty binds to race, culture, and family. I think Cassie showed an example on the last slide about, what would you say, what would you do? One of them being you'll bring shame to the family. That I think is an example. But other examples that I've heard of is like when it comes, I think something that could relate to you guys as you guys being UF students, if there is something that happens within an organization, if you come forward, this organization is not going to be able to be in an organization with the next couple of years. And something that relates a lot to UF students as well is just having those friend groups, those solid friend groups, and the threat of it kind of breaking apart just because of a sexual assault is something that really is a barrier for some people to come forward with their experiences. But if anyone has any other kind of barriers that they want to mention in the chat that they think of, either on a personal level or kind of like on a legal criminal justice system, feel free to do so.
Valeria, I know you mentioned, which I think is a really great point, the connections within an organization. And so does that look like, does Greek life play a part of that? Do our athletic divisions play a part of that? When you think of the girls' Olympics, gymnastics teams, how there's a coach who's been sexually assaulting girls for years. How does wealth and power play into those things too? And so what groups are we a part of? And how comfortable are we if we were to report something? And if we're not comfortable with that, then how do we check into that organization and think about how to change that?
Right. If you are part of an organization where you feel that just talking about the subject is not something that you're completely comfortable with, always trying to engage in other resources. Don't kind of carry that burden on yourselves. I know with our organization, we do a lot of outreach, a lot of presentations, we could have that open conversation, that open discussion, and bringing about resources and just having a dialogue, I think is the best way to go about it before it becomes something that leads to something more, if that's the best way of saying it. But
I'll go to the next slide for you.
Yeah. Right, so here are just some 3 images of places where you can report if you are deciding to report to the legal system. So one could be the Gainesville Police Department, UPD that's located on campus, as well as ASO. And then next slide. Right, so non-reporting. I think when we talk about reporting, a lot of times we don't mention non-reporting. I think it's important to explore that as an option. I know oftentimes we don't feel the need as victims to come forward to law enforcement, and that is perfectly fine. But here are your options if you do decide to go through that route, or if any of your friends or anything like that decide to go through that non-reporting route. So a forensic exam can be done without reporting to law enforcement within 5 days of a sexual assault. I know some people might be questioning, like, why would I want to do a forensic exam if I'm not reporting to law enforcement? So a forensic exam, if you're non-reporting, will provide you with the essential prophylaxis that you might need after a sexual assault. So that would be STI prophylaxis, HIV prophylaxis, and the morning pill or Plan B. And it's also just a way to kind of check your body, make sure that you're okay physically. It's completely free of charge, and it happens in 6 hospitals in Alachua County, if I'm not mistaken by that number. And with that forensic exam comes a lot of intimidation, especially with going into a hospital. I will say that you can always call our services, and we will have an advocate on call to accompany you if that is something that you're comfortable with, so you don't go through that process alone. For non-reporting, there's also counseling services that we offer at our center that are available whether or not someone reports, and we won't guide you in any which way. We're just here to kind of listen to you and be that moral support that you need during that time. Okay, so this website is very resourceful. It's reportrapegainesville.org. As you can see here through these options, it answers a lot of questions that you may have that you're not too comfortable with engaging in a conversation with. But definitely if you kind of just want to look stuff up independently, or if you want to kind of report or kind of recommend this to somebody, this website will have those questions answered, and then you can always make an anonymous report as well. But we will, oh, I think, yeah, Alexandra included that on the chat.
And I'm going to quickly chime in. So when you click on that text box, make an anonymous report, what I really love about the collaboration we've done with our law enforcement is that for some people, submitting a report online and just kind of saying, this is my experience, this has been my story, and for them, that's enough. This is a very guarded site, so I think only 2 people have access to this information. I think one of our advocates and one of our detectives. But when you make an anonymous report, what this gives you, the person who's filling this out, is at the end of it, it gives you the option to say, I'm just sending this information. I'm not putting any contact information. It's just out here to kind of share my story because someone's going to read it. 2, you have the option of being contacted by a victim advocate. But then you also have the option to select, yes, I would actually like to be followed up with a detective. So someone from law enforcement. So you do have a few options, when you are making this report. But again, the premise of it is that, if it is an anonymous report and they can't contact you, nothing's going to happen in the criminal justice system. Because we do need the permission of the victim in this case. But for some, you know, I've had experiences where I've been on the helpline and someone's called and, you know, we've been having, you know, a really good conversation and we've done crisis counseling and we've kind of explored our reporting options just as Valeria has been doing, you know, and I've shared this. And then a couple hours later, they called me back and they said, hey, I submitted an anonymous report. I just wanted that to be a part of my story. And for them, that's what they needed. That's all that was, I would say, sufficient for them. And so again, it's going to be different for everyone. Not everyone's going to want to utilize all the different resources or options out there, but this is just another tool for the toolbox. So we'll go to the next slide. Oops. There we go.
Right, and here are our resources that are available. Like I think Alexandra already put in the chat, the reportrategainesville.org. And then this number over here is our helpline number as well, 24/7. And then the Office of Victim Services at UF. So that number will connect you to the victim advocates, if I'm not mistaken, at UF. And if you have any kind of questions or concerns about Title IX, you guys do have a coordinator, and that's their contact information and how they can be reached.
And one caveat with Title IX, in that knowing our resources on campus, pretty much everyone on campus is a mandated reporter. And so we do explore and we do want people to be mindful about who they are sharing their stories with on campus, because that could trigger a Title IX investigation, a timely warning, because they're by law required to. And so we do ask that people either call our center, and we can do like hypothetical, because we're not mandated reporters for campus properties. And so we can do a bunch of like hypothetical situations and we can contact the appropriate people on campus and do those hypothetical scenarios so that we can make sure we get you the best options and resources. Again, we're not affiliated, you know, with campus, so it makes that process a little bit easier. But then if it is something that we are exploring and reporting, we would get you those connected to them, because if you were interested and you needed a change of classes, you know, or assistance with your academic load, there were safety concerns on campus. Those are things that we would initiate and we could do together, of course. So we would just want to be mindful of that process. Again, mindful reporting on campus, because it could trigger the Title IX timely warning and Clear Act, because they're required to. And so definitely give us a call to kind of help navigate that process. Title IX is a very complicated process. The rules and policies for it have changed both under the Trump administration and is in the process of being changed again now under the Biden administration. And so it's constantly evolving and changing. And so we've had many conversations with their coordinators at our Coalition Against Sexual Violence meetings. And so they're still learning and adapting to things as it changes. And so it's always best to kind of reach out so we can explore what we're looking for and what services we can do to best guide you in that process if we're deciding to go down that route on campus. Yes. All right, we're going to move a little bit along. I think this is okay. So we do want to be mindful of time. And so I think we're almost at the end. And so fortunately, as we've kind of gone through this and have a concept, you know, bad things have happened in our community and to ourselves. And so one thing that I really do love on how we can figure out how to change that is by introducing bystander intervention. Bystander intervention really encompasses two things, and that power-based personal violence is not okay and it's not going to be tolerated. And two, everyone needs to do their part to help. And through that, what we are engaging and asking folks in the community to do is to really focus on harm reduction. And you can do that in one of three ways. And so this premise is through Green Dot. It's a program that's been supported and backed by the CDC. And it's the 3Ds. So the first one, if you were to see a situation that we would consider maybe inappropriate, it kind of gets the hair on your arm standing up, it gets you the butterflies in the stomach, and you just feel like something about this doesn't seem right. We would ask that you do one of these 3 things. Be direct. And so that means confronting either the person who's doing the harm or the person that's doing or being harmed. So this is going to be someone who's a little bit more assertive and comfortable engaging in those conversations. For me, I'm not necessarily an assertive person, so I might delegate. And delegate means you're accompanying or asking someone else to kind of step in and get a second look of the situation to see if they're seeing the same thing. And so, for example, if you're at a restaurant and you see a couple arguing, we might be able to get the server involved or the manager involved. Situations where we feel like maybe someone has a little bit more authority in that particular environment. And then another way we could try to diffuse a situation is by causing a distraction. And so this is where you get a lot of creativity. So again, let's say you were at a restaurant and you saw a couple arguing. One example that you could do is maybe walk up, you could bump in their table and maybe spill their glass of water, right? You could go up to someone and maybe ask them for directions. You know, if you're on campus and you were to see something that you just didn't feel was appropriate, maybe asking them, hey, are you in my math class? Are you ready for that final? So all of these things are things that we can do, that recognizing we all have barriers. We all have things where we may not feel comfortable in doing something, but with our own barriers, we can distract, we can delegate, and we can direct. And that part of that, again, is we're letting people know that we are not accepting power-based violence in our community, and that we're expecting everyone to look out for everyone in our community. So I'm going to kind of skip some of these what would you do scenarios, but outside of green dot and bystander intervention, you know, some other areas that we can work on really improving the culture of power-based violence is sexual equality, female economic power, bystander intervention, policy change, and normalized speaking up. If we can work on, those are just some areas that we can work on to sort of improve how we address those gaps within sexual violence. There's a great quote from Green Dot. So it wasn't one person who did one thing that changed the culture. It's when a lot of people each did one small thing that the culture changed. And so recognizing, again, that we're not asking you to be Superman, Wonder Woman, Thor, any of those things out there in the world. You know, you're not going to have to quit your day job, but if you see something inappropriate happening, what one of those 3Ds can you do to sort of reduce that that scenario and making it so that that person who's being harmed is in a better, safe space. And I'm going to pass this on to Valeria to quickly wrap us up.
Okay. So just real quick, I think I've briefly mentioned some of these services that we offer, myself and my fellow advocates. So if you or just any other individual were to engage in our services, just noting that we are completely free and completely confidential. Aside from the mandatory reporting that Cassie mentioned previously. Another thing important to note is that we work with law enforcement, but we are not law enforcement, and you can engage in our services with or without involving law enforcement. We are also advocates. We offer legal and medical advocacy, and what that looks like can be just accompaniment. So if you or any individual just needs to kind of have that physical support throughout a legal process, we are here for you. We will be with you in every step of the way, as well as medical. If, as I mentioned before, with the SAFE exam, the sexual assault forensic exam, we will be there with you, just accompanying you and just kind of advocating for you in any way that we can. We also do safety planning. So that is also just brainstorming ways to kind of reduce harm or reduce the risk of violence. And that's something we do with conversations and just note taking and things like that. And community collaboration is, I think what we're doing right now is an example of that. Just doing this outreach and just having that kind of dialogue with y'all. Oh, and this is our Facebook page. So
The person
please
behind it. So I definitely encourage you to give us a like. I never thought I would say that in a job ever, but here we are. And then, yeah. I think that's a wrap. I think, I know we went over our time a little bit, so please feel free to chime in if there are thoughts, questions, concerns that anyone might have.
They shared earlier in the chat their helpline. I did get a message in the chat that someone wanted to see the slides. Oh, there's just 2 slides that I missed and I talked about it, but I can share them just so you guys can see it. I will be uploading to YouTube. Do you guys see the presentation right now?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so it was just talking about statutes of limitations, which I covered, and just the need to eliminate them. And then the other one was just discussing how I found 2 major ways to lower attrition in the US, which was trustee accompanying, which is what the Rape Crisis Center does, and then labels made by the children. So those were the 2 slides that you guys missed. But I was able to cover that verbally, but I understand for the visuals. Well, I just want to say thank you so much to Cassandra and Valeria. They took their time out of their day to come here and speak with you guys, and they've been working with me on this. And community outreach, I think, is one of the most like overlooked aspects of solving this problem. Like education, like I wanted academia to cross over to the community. I think that's like one of the most important things of what we should be focusing on. And I want to say thank you to everyone who attended. Please feel free to share the link that I'm going to be sending to everyone and be posting on my Instagram and the Rape Crisis Center. I'll send it to them so they can post on their Facebook. But yeah, so I just want to say thank you. And like Cassandra said, if you have any questions, we'll be staying on afterwards.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.